I'm about to use Tiny Toon Adventures as a metaphor for the Millennial generation. Wish me luck. So, they're rebooting Tiny Toons, and it's a hard reboot. They're resetting the continuity. Why are they doing this? Why do I care? Because Tiny Toons have inadvertently become the perfect metaphor for what happened to my generation, Generation Y, popularly referred to as the Millennials. Think about it. Unlike their contemporaries, like A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Flintstones kids, Tom and Jerry kids, and the Muppet Babies, the Tiny Toons were not younger versions of the Looney Tunes characters. They were young attendees of a university run by the Looney Tunes.
At the university, we earn our Toon degree. The teaching has been getting lax since 1930.
With the promise of one day graduating to the position of Looney Tunes themselves. You see where I'm going with this yet? Instead of the Tiny Toons becoming a new generation of cartoon stars, the original Looney Tunes just held on to their power and left their students to languish in obscurity. After Tiny Toons was canceled in 1992, they pretty much vanished from TV for 30 years outside of reruns and cameos from other Steven Spielberg-produced cartoons. Elmira got a spin-off with Pinky and the Brain for a season in 1998. That was about it. Meanwhile, the Looney Tunes got Space Jam 1, that one non-basketball related Space Jam sequel almost no one saw, and Space Jam 2, none of which featured the Tiny Toons. Taz got a show, Daffy Duck got a show, Sylvester and Tweety got a show, there was a Looney Tunes reboot, the Looney Tunes show. They revived the shorts on streaming. There was a futuristic sci-fi action cartoon called Lunatics Unleashed that ran for 2 seasons. That's gotta be rock bottom for this franchise. Just look at them. That's shameful. Not even Bootsy Collins could save this thing. They even did wind up getting a proper spin-off baby show like the ones I mentioned earlier from the 80s, a full decade after that trend was already dead. Also, something called Bugs Bunny Builders. The Tiny Toons were supposed to be going to school to learn how to be the new Looney Tunes, but the actual Looney Tunes never retired. They never passed the torch to the next generation. They left their students to languish in obscurity. The Tiny Toons wound up being about the hope for a future that would never come. Similarly, the Millennials were raised by the baby boomers on the idea that if they studied hard and did an exceptional job, they could achieve success or at the very least a career and a livable wage. But it turns out it doesn't really matter how well prepared you are for something. There isn't really a meritocracy. The gears will keep grinding away with or without you and your talents. Millennials were the most college-educated generation, and as a result, college degrees are like assholes. Everybody's got one, but most people's aren't making them any money. The boomers who were able to accumulate wealth and property held on to it. Things did not trickle down. In some ways, it's just timing. We were born in the decline. They were born in the rise, but also they could vote on our future while we were playing Jenga, and we'd have no idea until it was already too late. We were also raised on corporate media telling us we could save the environment.
It's up to all of us. Good girl.
But it turns out corporations cause a lot more pollution than an individual person, and they just promise to lower emissions and push back when they're going to do that every few years. Much like our tiny, toony counterparts, we were sold a false bill of goods, and now most of us are not doing as well as the generation who raised us. And sure, the Tiny Toons was a popular, funny, creative show that introduced us all to They Might Be Giants. But as a commodity, they were a hat on a hat. Like us, they were a success, but it didn't matter. The original Looney Tunes were still popular in the 90s off cartoons from the 1940s. Why bother with extra characters who look and act like they do? We got Crisscross, Bugs Bunny, and Taz shirts to sell. There was no room for them, just like there's no room for us. I think the people working on the new show must have understood this to some degree, and that's why they went for the hard reset. The Animaniacs picked up where the old one left off. Freakazoid had an episode of Teen Titans Go that openly acknowledged the old show, so why not the Tiny Toons? Because if you pick up where you left off, suddenly you have to explain why the Tiny Toons were nowhere to be seen in the last 30 years of the Looney Tunes franchise, and the Looney Tunes wind up looking like awful teachers. Plenty of changes have been made to the new Tiny Toons. I think making Babs and Buster siblings is pretty gross. I mean, they went to prom together. I get how doing something like that establishes this as a separate continuity. I think the most messed up thing to me is that not all of them want to be professional cartoon characters anymore. According to the press release, Buster and Plucky want to be performers, but Babs wants to direct, and Hampton wants to be a doctor because apparently cartoon violence has serious medical repercussions now. It's no longer consequence-free.
But a small percentage of Toons have damaged Looney DNA. Don't worry, it's a very, very small percent.
Woof. And Sweetie Bird, who is now in the principal cast, who wants to, quote, smash the patriarchy, which, right on, but I'm thinking they might have girl boss Sweetie Bird. That is a choice. Sweetie Bird was one of the most unserious characters on the original show.
Like bad karma, Sweetie Bird. Amanda Negataro.
Nuh-uh. He's a tasty, tender, meaty morsel McBucket.
I'd have girl boss Fifi because her Looney Tunes counterpart is a literal sex pest, but that's just me.
I think the whole idea of condoms and dates is a lot of sexist, outdated, how you say, hooey.
On the other hand, Fifi could be creepy too. Anyway, you see how they changed the character motivations. Now most of them aren't competing with the original Looney Tunes, and the two that are competing with each other. See how convenient that is for this franchise? To be clear, I don't want a depressing, grim-dark, adult animation Tiny Toons. I want the same silly show, except now all the characters have dead-end jobs and openly resent the original Looney Tunes cast. It could be like the Looney Tunes show where they lived in the suburbs and were neighbors. Just do that, but in the city. It's a missed opportunity, sure, but there's another layer of the Millennial Tiny Toon connection I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. Now this part is a bit of a walk, but I think your adult ADD might really respond to that, so let me know in the comments below. Jack Kirby, the artist responsible for a ton of the classic Marvel Comics characters of the 1960s, was very keenly aware of the similarities between superheroes and gods. The Fantastic Four villain Galactus is based on the Christian God. The Silver Surfer, in Kirby's words, was his fallen angel. The Avengers, the X-Men, and especially his more cosmically powered teams like the Inhumans and the Eternals, were all inspired by his fascination with the old gods of ancient Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Norse myths. And when he went to DC in the 70s, he just straight up called his super team the New Gods. That name, the New Gods, I think it says even more than Kirby intended. Superheroes were the new gods, but not because of their outlandish abilities, but because of our idolatry of them as a society over multiple generations, just like the old gods. This extends to more than just superheroes. Any franchised intellectual property can ascend to godhood so long as it undergoes constant reiteration, reruns, reboots, adaptations, sequels. These are the religious texts of the many gods of capitalism. Through constant exposure, multiple generations can be indoctrinated to your IP. Hook 'em young, and if you stay on track, you'll not only have their precious nostalgia one day, but a loyal disciple who will indoctrinate their kid for you. I, for one, am indoctrinated to the WWE. I think the WWE is a great example because if you didn't grow up on pro wrestling and believe that it was real when you were little, it's almost impossible to get into as an adult. But I'm not simply indoctrinated to pro wrestling. I'm indoctrinated to the WWE and their specific style, characters, and presentation of pro wrestling. They have an inherent built-in loyalty for me, not always necessarily based on the quality of the product.
Little suck-up sellout full of suffering succotash, son!
But with my personal memories associated with it. Hell, some people's capitalist god is the Christian God.
Drink the spring water or whatever you need to do with it, it really works.
Release your faith now by calling for your free packet of Miracle Spring Water.
Download the new Chosen app, whether it's on mobile or on your TV app. You're going to donate to the Come and See Foundation. 90% of your dollar immediately just goes towards the production of season 4.
Look, the Looney Tunes had a 55-year head start on imprinting themselves on the minds of young people before the Tiny Toons came along, and as a result, the Tiny Toons are a hallmark of the millennial generation specifically. We're the generation that grew up on them. They don't really spark nostalgia for anyone else. Gen X, Gen Z, they can relate to the struggles I've gone over. Of course they can. But Tiny Toons are an explicitly Gen Y childhood relic. That's why changing them doesn't really matter. Most people aren't especially attached to begin with. Now that a bunch of millennials have kids, they're the best bet at indoctrinating a new generation to the show. This rebooted Tiny Toons can represent that new generation, and unfortunately, there are already connections there as well, because it's looking like these new viewers, just like these new Tiny Toons, are having to adjust their expectations. All the characters got to be stars in the original Looney Tunes, but Tiny Toons proved that that was not actually a sustainable model. And the Tiny Toons reboot mitigates this by taking bright, colorful characters full of potential and putting a ceiling on what they can achieve. Or maybe it's just a cartoon about some rabbits.